2020 Census Everyone Counts training. This was a stakeholders training that was conducted on February 10th, 2020 by the Williamson County and Cities Health District and the Healthy Williamson County Collaborative. So welcome to this training today. We hope that it will give you a great deal of information about the 2020 census that will be beginning in mid-March. The Williamson County Complete Count Committee was established in September by the Williamson County's Commissioner Court. This group was put together so that we could ensure that everyone counts in Williamson County. The Williamson County and Cities Health District has been designated as the lead in the hard-to-count populations. The United Way of Central Texas has been awarding funds to local organizations to help with the hard-to-count communities for the census, and the Health District, in coordination with the Williamson County Complete Count Committee, was awarded $30,000 in funds to pay primarily for the work of a census ambassador and replication and distribution of printed materials. So my name is Ray Langlois, and I am the Census Ambassador, Outreach Ambassador for Williamson County. And what do I remember about the 2010 census? The 2010 census, I don't really remember very much about it because I think my wife filled it out for me. And many of you probably remember it or had someone else fill it out for you as well. So in today's webinar, what we're going to do is cover some census basics, education and outreach strategies, as well as outreach resources. So census basics. What is the census? Well, the census is a questionnaire or a survey. It has 10 questions. It should take you about 10 minutes to fill out for each person, and it's done every 10 years. So the next census will be in 2030. And the questions range from household size to who else is staying in your house, do you own or rent a home, your telephone number, first and last name, gender, age and date of birth, your ethnicity, race, and relationship. If you are talking about additional people in your household, they'll ask you if they are your spouse, significant other, or family member, or just another family that's staying with you. The census will not ask things about immigration status or citizenship. Private information like your Social Security number, any financial information, you wouldn't have to give any credit card numbers or anything like that, and donation status. All of those things would not be part of this census, and it's not information that will be collected. Why is this census important? Well, there's 3 reasons why the census is important, and it all boils down to these 3 things. Money, financial funding for initiatives, power. How is representation and power distributed in your locale, and then data collection so that there can be good data to support statistical documentation. So on the funding, we'll talk about that a little bit later, but 55 federal programs are funded through the census. A lot of in the political representation, it comes from reapportionment and redistricting. So it's based on the number of people who live in the area and then how do you divide up the geographical area based on those numbers. And then data for good decisions. Some of the things I've heard about the census, or you may already know about the census, is when cities hit certain thresholds, it's very important for businesses to know that, because it can bring in new opportunities. So who counts in the census? Everyone. So everyone's counted in the census. The census is for all people living in the United States on Census Day, April 1st, 2020. You will count all babies, young children, seniors, immigrants, incarcerated, formerly incarcerated individuals, people not living in houses, apartments, people living in group residencies. Everyone within a residence is also counted. So if you were counting yourself on the census, then you would also count any relatives, extended family, non-family members that are possibly renting, and then be sure to count anyone that's on your property. So when do you get counted? And that's probably one of the things that most people are waiting to learn. And that starts in March, around March 12th. The United States Census Department will mail census postcards to most of the homes in your locale. On those postcards, it'll tell you how to go online and fill out your census, or how to access it by phone or paper. The self-response, which would be the online, paper, or phone, will begin March 12th, and it ends July 31st. We use April 1st as Census Day, and it's observed nationwide. So service-based, how do we count folks who live in non-traditional settings? They'll be counted in shelters. They can be counted through soup kitchens or mobile food vans. They can also be counted in non-sheltered outdoor locations where they do a people who are living homeless population count. So from May to July, the census workers, called enumerators, will be visiting addresses that have not completed their questionnaire. So just to recap, from March 12th to May, they're looking for the most self-responses that you can get. And then May through July, they will start doing the door-to-door canvassing to find those that haven't had a chance to fill out the census yet. So most people can respond online this year, and this is new for the census, but you can still use telephone if that's more comfortable for you. And you can either request the census to be sent to you on paper, or those that live in the rural areas that might be challenged to find internet service will have the paper copies mailed to them. We're encouraging almost everyone to respond online, phone, or mail by April 30th so that we can have an accurate count of how many census workers we'll need to go to do the door-to-door campaign. So where do we get counted? The four areas that we get counted: residence, transitory locations, service locations, and group quarters. So in our residence would be mostly our homes or houses, or a place where we live or sleep most of the time. Transitory locations could be RV parks, it could be a motel, just where are you sleeping in the month of April. service locations, people experiencing homelessness, they'll be counted at their service locations, or they'll be counted outdoors between March 31st and April 2nd. And then group quarters, so college online housing, nursing homes, correctional facilities will be counted at those locations between April and June. So this brings up a good question that usually comes up about my son or daughter is away at college, and should I count them in my home, or should I count them where they're currently living if they're in an apartment at that college? And the answer is you should count them in the city that they reside for the last 6 months of the year. So if they lived in an apartment in a college setting, they would count at the apartment. If you have a son or daughter that lives with you, you will count them in your home. So how do I get counted? So this year, the U.S. Census Department is using a new online website to do the survey online for those that have the internet access. Several of our local libraries, as well as pop-up access stations, will be available for those who may not have internet access. But the online, they will mail out the census postcards in a staggered dates, so that the online census website doesn't crash immediately with everyone getting on it. But as soon as you get that postcard, it will have a login code, and the login code will allow you to go ahead and access the online survey. Now, just a reminder to you, when they send you the census postcard, it's sent to your residence. It's not addressed to you. So it will be sent to the mailing address of your residence, not a post office box. And then once you get that form, it'll say something like, the residents of this address, please fill out your census. It'll still be sent by mail to especially to our rural areas that will need to get copies by paper, just in case there's not enough internet access. And the Census Department has done canvassing over the last year to decide where those places are. It'll actually be delivered personally by paper to some areas, just because through the canvassing they have decided that that's the best route, since mail might not be the best form of delivery. They'll also, through canvassing has decided places that they will send the forms, the paper forms, out in English and in Spanish. So they are trying to cover these bases to get the highest number of self-reported percentage that they can. Also, the census can be done by phone. So for those that may have issues on the internet, may have trust issues about information and security over the internet, they can do it by phone. Also, another reason you might want to do it by phone, and we'll talk about this later, is for translation purposes. If you haven't filled out or self-reported by online, by mail, or phone by the end of April, then an enumerator, which is a census worker, will come by and knock on your door and take your information that way. Speaking of languages, the census can be completed in several different languages, and there are guides so that you can follow along with the census in other languages as well. So by mail, it'll be mailed in English and Spanish. Those would be your paper copies. By phone, you should be able to get it in English, Spanish, Chinese, Vietnamese, Korean, Russian, Arabic, Tagalog, Polish, French, Haitian Creole, Portuguese, and Japanese. And then there's over 30, close to 50 language guides that can be used to translate as well. So what about education and outreach strategy? So how can we get this information? And really the purpose of our stakeholders training was to say, how can you guys know about the census and then get that information to your clients and the populations and communities you work in? So that's a good question, and that's what we're going to cover next. So the education and outreach goals for the census and through the Complete Count Committee is to make sure that community members are informed of the basics of the census. There's a lot of misinformation that kind of floats out there, and especially when there were so many questions about the citizenship question and things like that. So we want to make sure that we can get accurate information out into our communities. Another thing that you can do is stay connected and engaged by accessing the WILCO 2020 census website. So that website is on wilco.org/census 2020 census, wilco.org/2020 census. And or you can email us by emailing 2020census@wilco.org, which is a great way to get questions answered. One of the things we're going to have to do is promote census jobs. So it takes a large amount of people to go out and to become census workers and to do the door-to-door work. And the best people to be census workers are not people that come from outside the neighborhoods, but it's if you can find someone in the neighborhoods. So they need to be 18 years old, and of course, be able to take this information down. They'll have to be trained, and they'll have to be given an oath to do that. There is actually compensation for this on a per hour basis, and you can find out more of that information through census jobs through the U.S. Census Department. So we want everyone in the community counted, and it's important because there's actually funding that we tend to lose if we don't have everyone counted. So there could be people in your community that lack trust, or they're afraid if the government has this information, they may something else may happen. And the U.S. Census Department has to be very confidential about this information, and all the data has to stay within that department. It's actually against the law for them to share that information with anyone. They do send an aggregate report to Congress and to the executive branch, but other than that, that information cannot be shared with other departments at the federal or local level. And then also, this is just a team effort. Everyone stands to gain from the federal funds that are distributed. Like we say, if you have schools, roads, and libraries in your town, you're using federal funds, and the census matters to you. So outreach-wise, what can we do? And this is a really important event that we're trying to do through the Williamson County and City's Health Department and my role as the Outreach Census Ambassador. And that is, how can we get this information about the census out to the communities? And so some of the ways that you can do that is through just dealing with the collateral, the things that we replicate and distribute. passing them out, making sure that others have those things available, and posting them in your office. Digitally, you can promote our website on your website, our link to our website. You can promote links to the United States Census Department on your website as well as any PSAs that come about. The United States Census has quite a few PSAs. In person, now this is one of the things that we'd like to offer. We have 2 outreach people that are working with the census through the health district. And if you had a table set up with census materials at events that are coming up, especially community events this spring, remember the census goes all the way through July 31st. So it'll be important that people stay in tuned and understand what's going on with the census, and also hosting workshops and seminars for your clients as well as your staff. Because sometimes what we found is the staff may have questions about the census as well, and they could easily transfer that information to the clients once they have full knowledge. Another way that you can be helpful with promoting the census and making sure everyone's counted is just through access. So several communities are making devices available through different resources like the libraries, the schools, their school administration office. They're doing it through the offices at the city government, and they can do it through their clinics. They can do it through the food pantries. Many ways that you can help people have access to the internet so that they can log on and complete the census. They can also provide a phone as well, because that could be another way that people could take the census. And answering questions. Most of us won't have all the answers to the questions, so a reliable source will be the 211 calling system here in Central Texas, and they will be open 24/7, and they're multilingual. So that would be 211. They would have all your census questions and be available for you to access 24/7. And then lastly is campaigns. Maybe make it part of the your spring events campaign to push out information on the census, make it part of your social media, make it part of your monthly or quarterly or bi-monthly meetings. Just make it a priority within your own organization, which could be really helpful to those who are trying to learn more about the census. Another thing is just how do we address misinformation and myths and accurate information? So probably the best thing to do with the census, and this is one of the things that I've had to really temper myself to do, is just to give accurate information based on the information that's been provided by the U.S. Census Department. That's usually the best way to go about this. This training, for example, is one of those. We have other trainings that are available on our website. But don't speculate or give too many examples or repeat disinformation is probably one of the best things that you can do. The other thing is, what do you do when a conversation just kind of focuses on disinformation? And I've had this come up a couple of times when I was doing outreach. And what I try to do is just pivot the conversation to something that's more productive and how this census applies to everyone's lives. But you're always welcome to contact me, Ray Langlois, your Census Outreach Ambassador at 2020census@wilco.org. If you have any concerns, questions, or you need us to vet some information for you, the U.S. Census Department puts out a number of documents, and it makes it really super easy just to hand person a document and let them look up that information on the document. So I told you we're going to get back to talking about a little bit about what happens when people don't self-report, and what about populations that tend to be historically underreported. And that population is called the hard-to-count population. The hard-to-count population, it seems self-explanatory, but it's interesting how this comes up in various groups and in various geographical areas. So in Williamson County, as well as anywhere in Central Texas and probably anywhere in the United States, the hard-to-count population falls into 4 categories and sometimes overlap between the 2 categories, such as hard to locate, hard to contact, hard to persuade, and hard to interview. And when you think about the hard-to-count population, it's just basically those who might just fall through the cracks that you did not actually get a count on, but will probably need some of those services. So a lot of our stakeholder organizations work with populations that are historically underserved, and more than likely the hard-to-count population is one of their populations. But what we're talking about is just people that you can't really find them. They don't live in traditional residence or housing. You just don't really, they're not necessarily counted as part of a residence, and so that's definitely one of them. Hard to contact. These are people that maybe the traditional ways that the census notifications are going out doesn't reach them. Mail is hard. It's very difficult for them to receive notifications. So that would be part of the hard to contact populations. Hard to persuade, and that's an interesting one because there's people who have a lack of trust of the government, have a lack of trust of technology, and aren't really don't really see this as part of their civic engagement. So it just might get the census and say, I don't really think it's of any value for me to fill this out, or I'm afraid of what happens if I do. So that's a conversation that maybe by going through some of the stakeholder training, you would be able to talk to them about. And then just hard to interview. So a couple of things that I noticed, not only the language aspect being in someone's native language, but just things like literacy rates. Do they understand the terminology that's on the census itself, or just having internet access issues and not being able to find a place to take the census. So just a quick opportunity to show you the census department is going to have a couple of maps that through the Williamson County and Cities Health District, they will be analyzing these maps once the census starts. And this will give us the underreported populations, and it'll allow them to go back and target those areas that are traditionally hard to count. A lot of those areas right now are on the I-35 corridor, but when we drill down into this, we find a lot of our neighborhoods that English might not be a second language, and our rural populations that don't have immediate access to the internet in our population dense areas tend to be those areas that will be problematic as hard to count populations from the start. Some of the populations that we're looking at when we're talking about populations at risk of being undercounted are ethnic minorities, children. Sometimes they just get forgotten to be counted. Immigrants, those who are living here as immigrants. Persons experiencing homelessness, persons who are limited English proficient, persons with no internet, and persons who lack trust. And some of those populations are populations that are served by our stakeholders. So those would be some of the ones that we would want to make sure we could get as many as possible, the most accurate information that they would need to fill out the census. So what do you know about your community? And that's what's going to be the most important thing for stakeholders to think about is what community do you work in? Who accesses your services? And then how can you help them with the census? Some of the things that you might want to consider is what are the demographics of the community you serve? What is their educational attainment, income level, age, gender? Are they new or recent immigrants? Is language going to be a barrier? Are they renters, transient populations? These are all things to think about your clientele, as well as the people that use your services and the people that are in the community that you're located in. And then some of the questions you might want to think about is, what questions would they ask you about the census? And in the first part, the Census 101, we covered a lot of those questions. And then how would you respond? And like I said before, on our Williamson County website, wilco.org/2020 census, as well as the U.S. Census website, and I'll show you those addresses in a second. There's a lot of information on how to cover these questions with specific populations, especially in the areas of education, income, age, gender, immigration, languages, as well as transient populations. So what are those outreach resources that you could use, pivot to, in order to give out really good information to your stakeholders and clients and your community? And so here's some resources that we put together. And there's a lot more resources than this. So we certainly want you to use any of the trusted resources that's available to you, maybe through your parent organizations. But here's some of the ones we found that are vetted, and it's probably more information than you'll ever need. Like I said before, Williamson County 2020 Census, our Complete Count Committee, has a website at www.wilco.org/2020 census. The United Way of Greater Austin has done just a fantastic job of putting some resources down, taking the U.S. Census resources and kind of fitting them to our community. So if you're looking at that website, it'll be under Let's Get Out the Count, Central Texas. And it's www.missionbox.com group/264/Central Texas 2020 Census. And I think you guys will find that pretty easy. Especially if you go to the United Way of Greater Austin's website. And lastly, one of the ready to use resources is the United States Census 2020 Shape Your Future website. It's an awesome website that you can use. It has so many resources, we couldn't even begin to name them. And if you go to 2020census.gov, especially if you access their outreach materials, you'll find materials in many different forms, as well as video and PSAs, and toolkits that you can use for your populations, as well as resources in many different languages. So just remember a few things that I hope to give you as takeaways from this webinar is the 5 things to share about the census. 1, the census is easy. You remember 10 questions in 10 minutes. every 10 years. And it can be done online, phone, mail, or in person between March and April 2020. And actually, the census ends. That's for the self-response, and then the census ends in July 31st. The census is safe, that all the census responses are confidential and they're protected by law. The census is important because it determines funding, political representation for the next 10 years. And really think about that. What is it going to look like in 2030? And those decisions that are made in 2030 will come from the 2020 census. And that census does not ask questions about your citizenship or immigration status, and that everyone counts. All residents in the United States are people in the United States. The census is required by the Constitution. It's part of our law, and that we are to count all people living at your address, even if they're not related. So what we're asking you all to do is to keep calm and census on. And you can do this by invite others to be trained or to listen to this webinar. Share it amongst your staff. It's going to be under 45 minutes, so I think it would be very easy for you to give this to others so that they can learn. Complete your census right away when you get your postcard mailed to your house, or if it comes in a paper copy, complete your census right away. Borrow from the resource websites that we have posted on this webinar. Utilize that training, outreach materials, or contact us and let us come out and do some outreach for your staff or clients. Connect with your Wilco Complete Count Committee. The easiest way to do that is number 5. Ask the questions at 2020census@wilco.org. You can connect with the Wilco Complete Count Committee there, and you can also ask any questions to find resources. We currently have a couple of other groups that are looking at starting complete count committees. Georgetown has one that's well underway. Taylor approved one, and I know that Liberty Hill's working in that effort, and we're presenting in Florence as well. So lots of good folks are getting on board and figuring out ways that we can find out that everyone counts. So I'd like to conclude by just saying thank you for taking some time to listen to the stakeholders training today. I think it should give you a great idea of how your organization can help share the knowledge and information about the 2020 census, as well as improve the responses that we can get from all the individuals to make sure that everyone counts. Remember, it really has an impact on our community, and it has an impact on shaping our future. So this is Ray Langlois, your Census and Outreach Ambassador. If you'd like to contact me, it's pretty easy, 2020census@wilco.org. Thanks, and have a great day.